Hi, everybody, and welcome to what is, I believe, the third episode of our new I'm saying sermon series, but it's more like a conversation series as we're working our way through the book of Mark. With me, as with our last two episodes, is Lindsey Peacock. Say hi, Lindsey.
Hello.
One of these days, you're going to do the horrible dad joke and say, hi, Lindsey, when I say that, and I'm just going to laugh and laugh and laugh.
I will probably.
Yeah. So today we're going to be working more through Mark and things like that. But I want to continue a little bit the conversation we were having before I hit record here about where religion came from, because holy God, there are a lot of different origins to religion. Now you're familiar with a lot of the pagan stuff, right?
Yes.
Yeah. So you can probably say more about that than I can. We were talking about how some of the oldest religions out there are kind of like subcontinent stuff, like the Levant religion that eventually grew into the Israelite Hebrew faith, and eventually into Judaism and Christianity and Islam and others. But there's also, like, there was one in Sumeria, general Mesopotamia. There were a couple of other monotheistic or pseudo-monotheistic religions as well. There's a lot of crazy stuff out there.
Yeah, there's definitely a lot of different origins for sure. Everything I know of was like mostly, I mean, obviously everyone knows Greek mythology is a big one, but Celtics had a really big part in, the pagan witch movement. But a lot of it actually started in like northern Scandinavia. There's a tribe, and I cannot for the life of me remember their specific name, but they're still around. There's a part of them that's still around. They're reindeer herders now, but they actually have some of the oldest like hold in paganism, living in the mountains way up there by themselves.
Yeah.
And they worship nature and, animals and Mother Nature as a whole. So, I mean, I guess it could have been considered monotheistic in the fact that they were worshiping Mother Nature, but she's a multi-entity person. I mean, she's everything that's alive. So,
yeah. Well, where it gets interesting to me, I remember having this conversation at seminary a while back. We talk about ancient religions like the Romans and the Greeks and the Celts. And when you mention that to a seminary professor, they laugh and they laugh and they laugh because archaeologically or historically speaking, those are relatively recent societies.
Right. The tribe in Scandinavia, though, I mean, they can be traced back, back to 1000 BC or longer. I mean, they've always been there. They are never left.
Yeah.
So those tribes up there, that really is like my only stronghold in that, to be like, hey, no, we did exist.
Yeah.
When we were there and we were still believing the same shit we believe now. So
right. There's no for my money, at least, there's no arguing with like the Hebraic faiths and the stuff from the Levant and things like that, because those go back to before the dawn of the written word, which is at least closing in on 10,000 years.
You guys have like physical proof though. See, the thing about that is like your church way back in the day decided that people that worshiped my way were really not just like chill, and they kind of destroyed like any hard evidence we had of existing. So I got nothing to show for it, but I can tell you we were also there.
That's not nothing. Yeah, the church has been historically bad about like blowing up anything that it disagrees with. Yeah, do gotta own that one ourselves. But
speaking of religion, though, really quick, one quick thing that I brought up the other night while I was out here with, Cody and Anthony and them, I was like, I realized there was a gap in education that I received at the two major high schools I attended in town.
There's a surprise.
And then there was the inner city school in Muskegon that I went to, which was years behind in their curriculum, but it was also vastly different. And I asked, why did we leave Europe to come here to the US? What was the reason that we were told?
Yeah, I shared this bit on Facebook myself last week. Yeah, we were told that the people who came to America were trying to escape religious persecution, but we never asked what they were getting persecuted for.
For being terrorists.
Yeah, that's kind of a thing.
We're literally a country founded by terrorism.
Yeah, that kind of religiously oriented revisionist history is as American as apple pie, which, by the way, was invented in England.
Yeah, I was going to say, that's not even American.
Right.
We steal everything.
But that honestly that really is when we're talking about the beliefs and practices of generically American Christianity. Like, that is really a good place to start from in kind of a general mental perspective. We ain't all we crack ourselves up to be. Not only does our cultural mythos fly in the face of established history, but our religious connections to that mythos. So much of American Christianity is rooted in American identity, this kind of belief in manifest destiny and American exceptionalism and this kind of perverse individualism, which absolutely none of that is compatible with Christianity. And this is where I laugh and laugh and laugh when I look at American political discourse, because, y'all want to claim America's a Christian nation. Y'all, we were the OG communists.
Literally, yes.
Literally, the first churches were outright communes. Like,
we murdered a monarch and then got shipped off on boats and told, I don't care where you go, but you can't stay here. It's just not quite what they told us. But like, I did learn that at Muskegon, which I thought was interesting, that two different schools in the same city would teach such vastly different history curriculums.
Yeah, well, let me ask you this question. Which of those two schools that you attended, the inner city school and the, shall we say, melanin-deprived school, which of those two institutions had teachers who were getting nice fat paychecks and could stand to lose quite a bit if they taught off the established curriculum? And which one had teachers who DGAF did not care because they weren't getting paid for crap anyway?
Yep.
Yeah.
I mean, I'd say that the inner city teachers actually cared more. They just didn't care about their paycheck because they knew it wasn't going to be shit anyway. But yeah. I mean, they had double the class load, half the paycheck, and none of the resources, but they were definitely quality teachers. They definitely were a lot more like interactive and honest, and they would be willing to have discussions and debates and conversations and admit that they might be wrong or that someone might know something they don't. And it was definitely a better experience school-wise.
And that's a problem we wind up having in the churches as well. Like, and this is something we've been debating this in mainstream Christianity for years, is how do you get a pastor to speak prophetically, to tell the honest, unvarnished truth to a congregation full of rich white people who are paying their salary through the collection plate? And the short answer is you don't. Many pastors I know, pretty much every pastor I know who serves in a traditional church is in one way or another tied to this necessity of, well, I can't be too dramatic. I can't preach too prophetically, otherwise I'm gonna lose people.
See, isn't money like one of the like real big no-nos in your religion? Isn't greed like specifically like an issue that you guys are supposed
to
like?
Oh, most definitely. And this is the real hard part of trying to operate Christian institutions that A, have the power to affect social change, but B, exist in a capitalist society. That compromise point is a pain to find. And I wish I could stand here and be the prophetic voice that says, yeah, I know what the answer is, you need to do this, but I don't know how in the name of Almighty God we are supposed to juggle that problem.
We need to get rid of money. I suggest we replace currency with rocks, because then I'm going to be very, very wealthy, first of all. Second of all, I just think money is stupid, and I think we need to stop. Everything in the world, the whole world runs off of money. In every religion you look at, greed is an issue that we're supposed to combat. Yet we've all, across the board, given into greed. I mean, like, across the board. We have to survive. You have to want money.
I stand by a belief I had as a young man, which is that, we could do really, really well if we listened to the teachings of Jesus and then built our society according to most of what Gene Roddenberry said.
Okay.
Like, I mean, let's be honest, aside from his complete disdain of anything vaguely religious, the man had a lot of good ideas about how to build a society. The first one, of
Yeah.
course, being, let's get rid of this money thing. It's not helping anybody.
It's not. That's why, with the land that Cody's parents gave us, we want to make kind of like a little commune with our really close friends, like our chosen family. Because why not? Why not move out there, have all this land, and have, grow our own food and build greenhouses with my friends and work with each other to do things. Like some of us are really great at, teaching math to children. And that's definitely not my strong suit. So I'm going to send my kids to Katie's house when it's math time because she's got the patience to do it, or the better whiskey, whatever it is, she can do it.
Yeah.
And you just can't depend off your community without an exchange of money. It's just because you care about each other. Like,
yeah. And what you're talking about here is a complete re-envisioning of what society is and what society does in light of what it should be, what it could be, and what, if we're being religious here, God says it ought to be. And that's not, I think, distinct from, and watch me pivot here, exactly what Jesus starts to do in today's text.
Oh, that was a good one.
Oh, yeah. Look at me being all professional and stuff. Oh, yeah. Yeah, I got it.
Almost like you wrote it, but you didn't this time.
I know, I did. But in fairness to anybody who's watching here, I did not write or prepare anything. We're just sitting here.
No, that was
the text. We're going to riff on it. I honestly wasn't entirely sure we were going to record tonight at all. So we're going to have fun with this, and we're going entirely off the cuff.
I like it. Yeah.
So I'm going to page over.
I just lost you. Where's your voice? You just like slowly faded into nothing. Oh.
We good?
Oh, I can hear you again.
Yay! Hopefully I'll edit that out, and if I don't, oh well. So I am going to go ahead and page over, and I'm going to read through the English text of today's scripture. We're going to read the rest of Mark chapter 1 here. So I'm going to put that up on the screen, and we're going to read through it.
Okay.
We are starting from verse 16. I'm reading, of course, in the New Revised Standard Version, which is, in my opinion, the most generally linguistically appropriate, but even it has its failings. If you don't have one handy, it's on the screen because I'm screen sharing because I'm a nice guy. But failing that, read whatever Bible you have handy. Sometimes those differences in translations can mean a lot. All right, let's chill for a second. I'm going to go ahead and read this. So starting from Mark 1, chapter 16, Jesus calling the first disciples. As Jesus passed along the Sea of Galilee, he saw Simon and his brother Andrew casting a net into the sea, for they were fishermen. And Jesus said to them, "Follow me, and I will make you fish for people." And immediately they left their nets and followed. As he went a little farther, he saw James, son of Zebedee, and his brother John, who were in their boat mending the nets. Immediately he called them, and they left their father Zebedee in the boat with the hired men and followed. They went to Capernaum, and when the Sabbath came, he entered the synagogue and taught. They were astounded at his teaching, for he taught them as one having authority and not as scribes. Just then there was in their synagogue a man with an unclean spirit, and he cried out, "What have you to do with us, Jesus of Nazareth? Have you come to destroy us? I know who you are, the Holy One of God." But Jesus rebuked him, saying, "Be silent and come out of him." And the unclean spirit, convulsing him and crying with a loud voice, came out of him. They were all amazed, and they kept on asking one another, "What is this? A new teaching? With authority! He commands even the unclean spirits, and they obey him." At once, his fame began to spread through the surrounding region of Galilee. As soon as they left the synagogue, they entered the house of Simon and Andrew with James and John. Now Simon's mother-in-law was in bed with a fever, and they told him about her at once. He came and took her by the hand and lifted her up. The fever left her, and she began to serve them. That evening at sunset, they brought to him all who were sick or possessed with demons, and the whole city was gathered around the door. And he cured many who were sick with various diseases and cast out many demons, and he would not permit the demons to speak because they knew him. In the morning, while it was still very dark, he got up and went out to a deserted place, and there he prayed. And Simon and his companions hunted for him. When they found him, they said to him, "Everyone's searching for you." He answered, "Let us go on to the neighboring towns so that I may proclaim the message there also, for that is what I came out to do." And he went through Galilee, proclaiming the message in their synagogues and casting out demons. A leper came to him, begging him, and kneeling, he said to him, "If you choose, you can make me clean." Moved with pity, Jesus stretched out his hand and touched him and said to him, "I do choose, be made clean." Immediately the leprosy left him and he was made clean. After sternly warning him, he sent him away at once, saying to him, "See that you say nothing to anyone, but go, show yourself to the priest and offer for your cleansing what Moses commanded as a testimony to them." But he went out and began to proclaim it freely and to spread the word, so that Jesus could no longer go into a town openly, but stayed out in the country, and people came to him from every quarter. All right, so we had a lot of stuff happen there. What's your first take?
He sounds kind of like a shaman.
Mm-hmm.
Like they're, writing a story about a shaman. Sounds like Jesus had a nice bag of herbs.
Mm-hmm. Now, it's historically speaking, it's interesting to note that early Jesus isn't distinct from various shamans and magicians and stuff that roamed the countryside in every civilization. They were very common in ancient Israel as well.
Mm-hmm.
So this early stage of Jesus, he hasn't really distinguished himself so much from the various other many magicians who are out there. I'm reading through this, and you know what is coming to my mind as I'm reading through a lot of this?
Mm.
A well-known movie I watched that I just recently rewatched called The Life of Brian.
I think I've heard of it. I don't know if I've seen it.
Monty Python's Life of Brian.
Oh, yeah. Okay. It's
Yeah.
just been a long time. Yep. Nope. No. Yeah.
Now,
right.
let me tell you, first off, that is a movie that hits way harder once you've done your theology degree, because, oh God, they really put the effort in onto that one.
I feel like it's worth a rewatch now that I'm not 16 anymore. So
Yeah. Oh, it definitely is. Notwithstanding that Roman guard in the movie who catches Brian and forces him through an entire Latin lesson. Like, as someone who has now had to study ancient Latin, it's hilarious in ways I didn't appreciate in high school. But yeah, so I was saying, as we're reading through this, I'm getting some severe kind of Life of Brian sort of vibe, because there's so much that's going on here, which is Jesus does a thing and it's like, shut up, don't bother me, y'all.
leave me alone.
Like, have you noticed that in a lot of these Bible texts, how Jesus is like, I'm gonna do a thing, but don't tell anybody. Anybody ever tell you why?
No, it's just he's a very, picky person.
He's a shy guy.
He's a shy guy. Yeah.
Oh, I'm humble. I'm Jesus. In official terms, it's what we call the messianic secret. The fact that Jesus kept his messiahship a secret as much as humanly possible. Now, that doesn't make a lick of damn sense to us Americans, right? Because we're like, dude, if I was the Messiah, I would tell frickin' everybody, right?
Right.
Like, I would get all of the Twitter followers and I would say, let's do the thing, even for good. Like, even if I wasn't just trying to self-aggrandize, if I wasn't just trying to make myself look good, I'd still be like, everybody, I'm the guy, follow me to the place and we're going to do the thing. We're going to do all the things and we're going to make the life better for everybody.
Right.
So what the hell is up with him being like, shh?
I don't know, but I don't like it, What'd you say?
No, I said, do you have a guess?
But it doesn't align with your guesses. So I think he was a shaman, and I think a lot of shamans were very secretive about their practices and didn't want, people to go out and tell why they were doing the things or how specifically they had done the things. But what's your take?
It's a good parallel, but there actually is like a rational reason for this. And that boils down to the difference between who the Messiah turned out to be and what the Jewish people were expecting. Now,
Fair.
when you say the word Messiah today, just about everybody thinks, oh, it's Jesus, notwithstanding that the term Messiah from the Hebrew Mashiach means dude who's been anointed with oil and doesn't have that particular of a meaning. It basically means the anointed one. Now, in the Hebrew tradition, that meant a warrior king a la King David, who was going to step to the throne, step to the Romans, and just basically tell everybody to step off.
Yeah.
You know, he was going to beat some significant Roman backside. He was going to fight and fight and fight, and there would be an independent Jewish state that could then immediately go to war with all its allies. And that's not something that's happened historically ever since, but that's beside the point.
Right.
So that's what people were expecting. There were a brand new King David who was going to build us the glorious kingdom. They weren't expecting what the Messiah actually was, which was a preacher, a teacher, and a man of peace.
Yeah.
They were expecting outright a man of violence. So whenever something came out, like, there is an established difference between a shaman who can do basic healings and somebody who's straight out telling demons to go get kerflunked, to get out of town, and someone who's raising the dead and stuff like that. You know, arguments over historical amplification aside, generally speaking, what Jesus was able to do was a level or two above the average shaman, at least. So, like, people were like, yeah, okay, definitely a Messiah. This is the guy. We're totally getting on this.
To be fair, though, at the same time, shamans that were accomplishing things that were comparable to Jesus were being killed. So they never really got the chance to, like, do the thing, because they weren't technically called shaman, because shaman were part of like a respected sect at the time. But the persecution of witches goes way back. I mean, we lived in the woods. We were seen as loners and these weird, creepy people in the woods, if you will. And we were regularly seen as criminal in some way.
I do want to warn you against cross-contaminating your contexts, though. Because when you talk about witches and stuff like that, that's mostly a Northern to Mid-European sort of thing.
The term witches, yes, but it goes back.
But within this context of the larger Middle East, the kind of traveling magician was frowned upon, but there wasn't like a pogrom of executions going on against them. Like, they weren't hunted down.
They weren't like publicly executing them, no, but there were groups of people that if you came across them were just like, you're up to no good and you're messing with like what people believe and we don't like it. And they would see them as false prophets too. There were Christians that would see other, shamans during the age of Jesus.
In fairness, we're not even talking about Christians yet, because those don't exist.
Well, okay.
True. So this is worth being careful with, because crossing your historical streams here is going to wind up with a Ghostbusters X explosion that's going to make no sense to anybody.
True. I'm more careful with the words I'm using. Yeah.
That said, in this time period, what you're thinking of is somebody more like John the Baptist. Guy in the camel hair eats the locusts, says the guy is coming. Oh, and there were a lot of guys like that in the time. John the Baptist was not particularly unique. Jesus was unique because he did not fit the paradigm consistent with the desert preacher, the roaming teacher. He did a lot of the same things, but he did them in different ways. And he was unique in that, unlike a lot of these guys, he was a rabbi. And this is something that we tend to miss a lot when we're talking about who Jesus was. He wasn't just some random dude who decided he spoke for God, as a lot of our evangelical friends tend to believe. Jesus was trained and lettered. He went to Hebrew school. He did all his training as a good Jewish boy. He went all the way up to the temple. He was a rabbi of, and I'm going to get this wrong because, again, I am a Christian pastor and not a Hebrew scholar. One of the two sects at the time, there was the Shammai and the Hillel. I believe he was Hillel school, if I'm not mistaken. And I may have those reversed. I don't think I do, but I may have those reversed. I believe Hillel was the more progressive school that eventually became modern rabbinical Judaism. And Shammai was like what we in Christendom, for like when we were in Sunday school, what they called the Pharisees. They were just rabbis and Pharisees of the Shammai school who believed in an extreme literalism. The conservatives at the time, basically, your fundamentalists.
Fundamentally.
Yeah. So it's worth talking about when we're kind of approaching Jesus in this context. He has a lot of what you're describing as shamanic tendencies, certainly, but he is definitively part of the Jewish priesthood as well. So he's got that overlap there. And that's something that's unique. We've got a guy who's touching on these kind of wild woods shamanic sort of approaches, but at the same time, he's legit. He's mainstream too. So this isn't just some guy.
Very uncommon.
Yeah, he did all the stuff, and he's still also taking these approaches. So it is unusual to see a guy go up to being a rabbi and then start wandering the countryside in that way. He doesn't stay in the temples. He's like, no, I'm going to wander around, pick up some disciples. I'm going to do some street healing and stuff like that. That was a bit of a shock. Like institutionally, it was a bit of a cognitive dissonance sort of thing going on.
It was something that hadn't been done.
Right, or at least hadn't been done effectively. So when we start going through our text here, we see him calling disciples and stuff like that. I find it interesting just how he's like, dude, come on. And they're like, yeah, dude. And they come. There's no dialogue. There's no back and forth. It's just like, this is a thing and we're going to do it. What do you take on that?
I think those stories are kind of a little shortened. I'm sure there was more of a conversation to, hey, come follow me. I don't really think he just like passed by a boat and two guys were just like, fuck our dad, let's go with this guy. Like, I think there was more to the story. I think maybe it's lost in translation or locked in the Vatican, but I think there's more to the story. I don't think he simply just passed by and they were like, let's go.
But with what we have right
weird
now,
Pied Piper shit.
Yeah. I don't exactly have access to the Vatican archives, so I can't say if there's anything new or different there.
Sure there
what
is.
I can say is from the text at hand, it's pretty straightforward. He's just like, come on, and they come with. What would it mean if that was the case?
Telepathy goes back to Jesus is an extraterrestrial.
I love that because one, I love the creativity in that, but also it continues with the issue that we always have is it looks at this story isolated from context.
Mm-hmm.
It's like he walks up, they call, he calls, they follow, that's it. But so much of what precedes this and so much of what comes after this is Jesus establishing himself, building his reputation. I fully would be of the belief that Jesus is walking along the shoreline and these fishermen guys, they know who this dude is and they know what he's about. Like, this isn't just random dude says, come on, y'all. And they say, oh, yeah, screw you, Dad. Like, I don't think that's what happens here. And I agree with you on that. But I think what we're missing here is context and not necessarily content.
So you're saying that he was basically already celebrity status and they saw him and were like, we're going with him.
I mean, local celebrity status, certainly. Like, I wouldn't say that he was like, the John Bon Jovi of street preachers here. Letting my New Jersey side show there for a minute. But I would say that he's definitely extremely well known. Now, take that to the flip side and look at these presumably younger male fishermen who are just kind of hanging out on their boats with their dad doing the family business. And a guy comes by who is a minor celebrity and says, come with me. I could use y'all. I mean, if it's between that and sitting in fish guts with your dad for the rest of your life.
Sounds like a saucy opportunity. So yeah, I can see
Yeah.
them being easily drawn to that.
Yeah. And in that context, it actually kind of makes a certain degree of sense. And I'm going to do the very non-pastoral thing, and I'm going to put a little bit of a creepy tint on it here for a minute. But this is actually exactly the same sort of mentality that works in cults. It works with white supremacists. It's providing an out, providing an opportunity for social development, social advancement. Now, I obviously would not be ordained if I did not believe that Jesus was utilizing this with good intention and good purpose, and not like, hey, let me get some folk.
Yeah.
Obviously I'm not of that particular belief, but it is interesting to me to look at this and think, wow, these are the same techniques we see so massively abused today being used for positive goals and aims by Jesus himself. It's a big testament to my belief that tools are neutral. How you use them is what isn't.
Yeah.
And so anyway, that's my rant on that. So we got our recruitment, we got some healing and some preaching. From these kind of healing and preaching stories, what was your takeaway?
Again, it was very shamanic. It was very much it's cut down. There's not a lot of context to them. He just says, oh, he healed him, he touched him, and he was better. What did he touch him with? Was it his hands? Was it just his hands? Was it an ointment? Was there a cream involved? I feel like there's more steps to these things.
Possibly. I know you're always inclined to go the kind of forest healer sort of way here. What I find interesting, and this is always a perspective I've taken, I look at the whole demons angle here.
Yeah.
And I'm a big believer in a very logical approach to faith. And I think you've known me long enough to know that I don't believe faith and science, faith and logic are incompatible. But I also do recognize that there are things that are beyond our ability to perceive. That being said, my presumption here is that a large portion of what Jesus was encountering was people experiencing psychological distress.
Mm-hmm.
And we've seen that historically, is that demons has been the shorthand for everything from autism to ADHD to you name it. And so my guess here is, and this is again, I wouldn't even qualify it as a guess, an educated guess perhaps, is that what Jesus is doing is giving people a social out. You remember that song, Baby It's Cold Outside? That It Sounds Super Rapey song?
Yeah.
One of the great analyses I've seen of that song was that, yeah, it sounds that way when you look at it in a modern eye, but it was actually very empowering to the standards of the time, because the guy's doing the push and pull. He's giving her excuses to do what she wants to do rather than to follow to the strict social custom of the time.
Exactly.
And when you look at that song that way, that kind of mindset is how I look at a lot of what Jesus is doing here. He's like, all right, demon, why don't you go ahead and get out? And people are like, okay. And it gives them a social out to get out of some situation that they're stuck in, some problem that they're having, something that they couldn't have got closure with or worked with otherwise in the tools and mechanics of the time.
I mean, at the time, there weren't exactly psychiatrists to come talk to you and be like, hey, look, these parts are okay, but this isn't. And I think it was more of I think it's more of a mincing words. They're not telling the whole story. I think, Jesus had already gone through at this point and become a rabbi or whatever. He'd already gone through the school you said, I can't pronounce, but basically in not so many words, that would be like the seminary, right?
Yeah. Yeah. No, he was a seminary grad,
The
definitely.
seminary, he learned all about, being a good person per
Hmm.
se. And then he
Yeah.
comes out and is like, oh, these people need someone to talk to them like a human instead of telling them that they're full of demons and spooky ghosts.
Mm-hmm.
So he probably was like, hey, your demon is this. So instead of giving the demon fuel by acting this way, try doing things this way. And then suddenly the demon's gone.
Yeah.
But it's
And it's
really, he
worth
just gave them coping mechanisms and taught them how to be themselves in an appropriate manner.
Exactly. And it's worth noting too that, and again, I'm going to preface this by saying, Christian pastor, not Hebrew scholar. So I reserve the right to be wrong about when I talk about kind of the deep cut Hebrew stuff like this, particularly when it comes to Judaism and its early stages. My understanding is such that the Hillel school at the time, of which Jesus was a member, was big on the belief that God, love, same thing. So God's command to love others is big on listening. It's big on understanding. It's big on acceptance, with some variation to account for the culture and consistencies at the time. That was the goal of rabbis within that school, was to listen to people, to understand people, and to adjust their understanding of what it means to be loving to where that person is at. So I see in a lot of these demonic healings kind of cultural subversion from Jesus. It's like, all right, I'm going to kind of subvert the tropes of the culture a little bit. I'm going to give the out. I'm going to kind of make it happen so that you're not getting yelled at by the Shammai Pharisees around the bend there. But at the same time, here's your out.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so it's a degree of ninjery that I really tend to appreciate. Now, the same, of course, cannot be applied to healings, like his healing of Mary at Simon's house, which we see in 29 through 34 there. And then that's followed by him curing many with various diseases. Now, this, I think, leans more into what you were talking about, shamanic medicine and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
And I would tend to think, and again, I will preface this to my more theologically learned colleagues who I know are definitely watching all of my videos. I speak in this without a great deal of knowledge on the historical and societal context, so I reserve the right to be wrong. But my guess here is that we're seeing something along the lines of Jesus having recognized some things that work in that context and utilizing them where they would not otherwise be utilized. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Yeah, like, okay, well, we know these herbs and these situations and these sorts of practices will do the trick, but they're not totally kosher, not totally clean. So I'm going to kind of do them under the table and claim to be healing. A little sleight of hand plus a little not entirely kosher healing technique means miraculous healing. I'm going to guess there was a lot of that going on. Now, that is, of course,
Agreed.
That is, of course, not to take away from the presence of the divine here. And that is a risk we run when we
Look, I think it's very divine to have the knowledge, tools, and ability to heal people.
Yeah.
Shamanically or otherwise, I think that is a divine trait to have. Mm-hmm. Do I think that it is specifically only Jesus that had that? No. But do I think that he was kind of, a forerunner of his time? He went in and did exactly what you said. He took things that those people specifically probably wouldn't have incorporated into their healing practices before, but because he knew the benefit of it and understood this is what you need. Whether or not you want it, the reasons you think it's unclean or unworthy to use don't matter. I talked to Big Daddy upstairs or whatever his reasoning was, he could kind of bend the rules, and he did.
Right.
Whether he had a reason or not to, he bent the rules and he fixed people and he really helped people. And I think he was, wonderful for what he did. Do I think it was honest of him? No. Do I think he could have legally and safely been honest about his practices and still gotten the same hoopla about him? Absolutely not. So he did what he had to do. And he made different tinctures and he made different healing methods, and he helped people that were just denying the help they could have had because they felt like it didn't align with them religiously until Jesus came and said, well, I fixed you.
Yeah. Now, of course, we don't know if Jesus was doing this via tinctures and stuff like that, or whether it was simply the supernatural power of the divine that gave him the ability to just heal. I can't dismiss that either because, again, I don't know. And of course, as a Christian pastor, I am more likely to lean towards the one than the other.
True.
And that being said, I think the real historical answer is probably going to be somewhere in the middle. That we have him engaging in some sort of reality-based healing practice that is divinely inspired, that is touched on by the divine. Because we all know that no matter how good your real medicine, without a little bit of luck, without a little bit of the divine, whatever you want to call it, it's still not always going to work. And that, I think, is where we see that connection there. But again, I don't know. And this is the larger discussion about where faith comes into our conversations about this. We spend a lot of time in these videos kind of deconstructing the reality of Jesus and what likely happened there. But there's a faith component to be had here as well, a belief component, to simply say that there is something in what is being done here that transcends the normal, that is a little bit beyond what we can grasp, what we can experience here. And at the beginning here in Mark, we're still in chapter 1. What we're seeing here is not that far above the normalcy line here. And I think you rightly identified this. It's not too different from historically consistent shamanic practices. It's not too far beyond what could be expected from a magician or a street healer or something in the context of the time. It's not too far beyond it yet. We're only in chapter 1. It's going to go beyond yet. And that's, I think, kind of the whole point.
So I have one quick point to make here. So this is after he's been baptized, right?
Yes.
So my theory, Jesus has already gone on, a psychedelic trip. And now when most people experience LSD or, the things that he probably would have been having at that time, anything like that, that's going to give you psychedelic hallucinations, kind of trips like that. It's a spirit journey, right? But it also makes you more connected with the whole universe as a whole. And people experience things such as, these major revelations they have while they're under the influence, and they come out and they talk about how we're all part of God and we're all part of this thing, or I learned something that I could do while I was under the influence, and now they're suddenly, a Reiki healer. I don't put any of that aside. I mean, I think we're perfectly capable of accomplishing more things. And I think psychedelics do have a great way of tapping into parts of the brain that we don't typically tap into. Mm-hmm. So I don't think it's outrageous to say that Jesus really liked some of those psychedelics and he tapped into some parts of his brain that most humans don't always tap into. There's healers out there that use, like Reiki and things like that, where you're literally you're touching the body and you're removing energy through your own energy. Mm-hmm. And a lot of people think they're quacks, and that's fine. But I don't think it's incapable. I don't think we're incapable of those things. I think it's perfectly plausible that Jesus learned how to alleviate pain and discomfort and disease through tripping on LSD.
Now, setting aside for the moment your absolutely terrible pronunciation of the word deiki, which is a Japanese word. Deiki? Japanese word? Come on.
Look, come on. Donald, I didn't even pass senior English, okay? My own language I can't speak.
All right.
We know I can't.
All right. Okay? Setting aside that one for a moment, I'm going to take the somewhat more Christian perspective here. I know your default is to always assume that Jesus be tripping.
Why wouldn't he? It was totally legal back then.
You hit on something interesting here, which is about psychedelics opening up a piece of the brain and a connective to something greater. I'm going to go ahead and take the position that perhaps Jesus was not tripping. but that in fact, Jesus, by virtue of being who and what he was, had that connection built in.
It's possible. I
Yeah,
won't say it's not, but
so what a lot of us have to resort to other means to get a taste of, Jesus had mainlined. So that would be, in broad terms, my perspective here, and that in approaching how Jesus perceived that connection to the divine and interacted with it, that we're broaching on that piece that made Jesus divine, in that he didn't need to sample it slightly with the taste of earthly abilities here, but that he could actually have the direct access. That would be my presumption.
What?
That would be my presumption.
And that's fair. I can understand where you're coming from with that. I tend to be a little more rational, and
you also tend to default to psychedelics with a surprising ease.
You know, it just makes sense.
Yeah.
When I read the Bible, I'm like, wow, these guys were sipping the tea a lot of the time. Okay. It's just where I go to.
And how much of that is them being stoned and or drunk all the time, because that's just how people were, and how much of that was translation is something that is good for us to discuss in part 2. So for now, I'm going to go ahead and put an end to part 1, and we're going to stop here because there's been a great discussion so far. So let's go ahead and end our part 1. For those of you who are still following along, thanks for listening to our first part of this. We're going to come back next week as we start to tear through the language piece, which is always the fun part, going word through word, talking about how screwed up our translations of this stuff are. That's what we're going to be looking at next week in this fun little quote unquote sermon series we've been doing. So any last words for this week, Lindsey?
No, just Jesus be tripping.
Well, trip it or not, I'm going to say Jesus be Jesus, and we'll leave it at that. So thanks again for those of you who are following. You can catch this video series wherever you're seeing it, of course, but we also have it on Facebook. We have it on our YouTube channel, and there's also the audio version on our podcast stream, which I'm assuming some of you are listening there as well. If you're on one and don't have the others, feel free to check them out. Most importantly, our community Discord server, which is where we're doing all of our interacting, our discussing, our follow-up on some of these very interesting, and I promise not entirely based on psychedelic discussions. That's all happening on the Discord server too. So join us there for some fun conversation. In the meantime, for this week, for those of you who are out there, whatever you're going through, whatever you're dealing with this week, I'm thinking about you, I'm praying with you, and God's with you too. Take care.